Our next chapter focuses on acids and bases. We're going to look briefly at Arrhenius acids and bases, as well as Bronsted-Lowry acids and bases, and finally, Lewis acids and bases. These are three different definitions or perspectives on acids and bases. The Arrhenius definition is the oldest. This was presented around 1884. And then both Bronsted-Lowry and Lewis acids and bases, these ideas were developed around 1923. With the Bronsted-Lowry definition, the focus is on the proton, whereas with a Lewis acid-base definition, the focus is on the electron. Now, in this video, we're just going to talk a little bit about Arrhenius acids and bases and then introduce Bronsted-Lowry acids and bases. According to the Arrhenius definition, an acid is a substance that produces H plus in water, whereas a base is something that produces OH minus in water. So for example, we could look at HCl plus NaOH, hydrochloric acid with sodium hydroxide, and these are going to react to form water and sodium chloride. Sodium chloride is a salt, and so this can be called a neutralization reaction. But another way that we can think about this is that when HCl is dissolved in water, it will dissociate to form H plus and Cl minus. So because HCl produces H plus in water, this is an acid. When we think about sodium hydroxide, once again, when this is dissolved in water, this will dissociate to give sodium ions and hydroxide ions. Because sodium hydroxide produces hydroxide in water, it is a base. Now, this is a definition that you may have learned about in a high school chemistry class. This is the oldest definition, and it is unfortunately kind of the most limited. In particular, this is only relevant in aqueous solution, but a lot of organic chemistry happens in organic solvents, not in an aqueous solution. So I wanted to mention this just because this is a definition that you might have seen before, but for the most part, we are going to ignore the Arrhenius definition. Instead, we are going to focus primarily on Bronsted-Lowry acids and bases. According to the Bronsted-Lowry definition, an acid is a proton donor and a base is a proton acceptor. Okay, wait a minute. Why did I say proton, but I wrote H plus? Well, think about a hydrogen atom. This has one proton and one electron. And if we lose an electron, that gives us the H plus ion, which is only one proton. So that's a very commonly used term. So according to the Bronsted-Lowry definition, an acid is something that donates H plus, and a base is something that accepts H plus. For example, we could look at hydrochloric acid reacting with ammonia, NH3, and these are going to react to give NH4 plus and Cl minus. So this means that HCl gave up a proton, and what's left behind is Cl minus, and H3 grabbed a proton or accepted a proton to become NH4 plus. Now let's write this out in a little more detail. So if we have our hydrochloric acid and we have ammonia, so we have 3 hydrogens and a lone pair on the nitrogen. And there is a reaction where the nitrogen can use this pair of electrons to grab the proton. So this arrow says that there's a new bond forming between the nitrogen and the hydrogen, and at the same time, this pair of electrons is moving onto the chlorine. So what we have left is the chlorine. These are the 3 lone pairs that were already there. This is a new lone pair that used to be this shared pair, And so chlorine now has a negative formal charge. And then we also have our NH3, but now that other lone pair was used to form a new bond with the hydrogen from HCl. And now if we look at this structure, we see that nitrogen has a positive formal charge. So it's very important to focus on the Bronsted-Lowry definitions, where an acid is an H plus donor, a base is an H plus acceptor, and so an acid-base reaction is proton transfer. So this is the only change that's happening, is that a proton is moving from one molecule to another, okay? But we have to always keep in mind that all reactions are driven by electrons. And so we say that it's proton transfer, but I encourage you to think about it as if the base grabs a proton, to emphasize the fact that, like we see with our arrow, it's the electrons that are moving to grab the proton. Right? We say this is a proton donor, which sounds active, and this is a proton acceptor, which sounds passive, but really we need to think about it as the base is actively grabbing the proton. You may have seen acids such as hydrochloric acid, sulfuric acid, and you may have talked about bases such as sodium hydroxide, but there is a wide variety of structures of acids and bases. And in particular, if we think about different organic molecules that are acids and bases, we really do have a variety of structures. This is an example of an alcohol. With an alcohol, we have an OH group, and this is an example of an organic acid. This is a carboxylic acid. So here we have a C double bond O, OH. This is a carboxylic acid, and as the name suggests, this is an organic acid. Here we have a C double bond O, a carbonyl group, and then the carbon adjacent to the carbonyl group, the hydrogens there are somewhat acidic. And so this is also an example of an organic acid. Now down here we have a few more compounds that can also be acids, but especially this one, these are really, 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 really weak acids. But we are going to see many types of acid-base reactions, either as the entire reaction or as part of a larger transformation. And so being familiar with these compounds and how they can, or not so likely, act as acids and bases is important. When it comes to bases, now we have something like an amine. On the previous slide, we saw ammonia, NH3. Well, we can also have a nitrogen that's connected maybe to hydrogens, but also connected to carbons, and that's an example of an amine. So ammonia and various amines, these are very common organic bases. Now up here I was talking about acids and I wrote an alcohol, and we were talking about acids and I wrote this, it's called a ketone, CH3, C double bond O, CH3. But now I'm talking about bases and I wrote these same compounds down again. Well, there are many compounds that can potentially act as an acid, or it could act as a base. It depends on what else it's reacting with. If this compound, for example, or this compound acted as an acid, this is what would be left behind. And then these are examples of bases. This would be a really, really strong base, and we are going to see some examples of this. One more example I wanted to mention here, a very important organic acid and base, very important biological acid and base. This is an amino acid. So we have an amino group and we have our carboxylic acid group, and then this carbon could be connected to a variety of different groups, where R is just a generic term. So R could be hydrogen, R could be a CH3 group, it could be a benzene ring, it could be a bunch of different things. We have 20 amino acids that make up all of the proteins in our bodies. So organic acids and bases, This is something you are going to be working with for a very, very long time.